Welcome, you're watching Kaleidoscope Srilanka Live News Capsule. Welcome to Srilanka Live News Capsule. With all the discussions on SOEs and reforming the public sector, we tend to forget that there's a powerful force that remains, and that's the private sector. Although things may be looking a little bleak, corporate earnings tumbled by 45% for the June quarter to 52.7 billion rupees from March's quarter figure of 95.3 billion rupees, making it the lowest earnings period among listed companies at the Colombo Stock Exchange. The 2023 first half earnings were at 148 billion rupees, which is beyond the pre-COVID average of 117 billion rupees. So, what does this all mean? Optimist, economist and expert member at the World Economic Forum, Talal Rafi, discusses why and how the private sector remains the engine of growth. Talal, welcome to Kaleidoscope. Once again, good to have you on the show. The corporate sector has had to tighten belts a great deal given the government's need to adhere to the IMF commitments. What has this done to our engine of growth?
Speaking of the private sector as a whole, they have shouldered the burden of the nation for some time. But looking at it from the government's perspective, the government is also in a tough spot. So let us just, we all have to admit that we Sri Lankans have been living beyond our means for decades. So even a primary budget surplus has only been attained 4 times in 75 years. So that's how bad our financial management is of governments. But the people are also to blame, you know. Politicians have come into power using very populist promises. And we have voted them to power. So, but right now, as far as the private sector goes, there are 2 concerns. There were 2 concerns. One is higher taxation and also interest rates. As far as taxes go, let's admit that, you know, Sri Lanka has one of the lowest government revenue to GDP ratios in the world at 8%. Even by emerging market standards, this is quite low. So we need to get it up. I mean, in the mid-1990s, it was at around 20%. So we've come down to 8%. The IMF just wants it to be at 15%, which is very reasonable. So, so there has to be a bit of belt tightening, but also I feel that the tax base also has to be broadened. There are 1 million cars running in Sri Lanka, vehicles, but there are only 30,000 tax files. So that's a puzzle that we need to solve. And as far as the other thing is interest rates. So there is complaints that borrowing costs were high. But as the central bank governor said, you see, borrowing costs are a fraction of the business. But if we let inflation out of control, inflation can increase the price of raw materials, your labor costs, and your borrowing costs. So I think the lesser of the evil options was to hike up interest rates to bring inflation under control.
What areas and opportunities do you see right now which the private sector can take the lead on to grow the economy the way it is?
If we are going to focus more on fast growth and at the same time earning foreign reserves, one would be the IT BPM sector. So even during the past 2 to 3 years, that sector has shown exponential growth. So there is a lot of opportunity in that sector. But for long-term growth, I mean, if you look at how empires rise and fall, you see, it always starts with education. So we need to compete on getting our education systems up to date. As a policy recommendation, I would say for long-term economic growth, focus more on education.
Kaleidoscope is on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. And if you like us, don't forget to subscribe and follow us.
You focus on your goals. We will take care of the risks. Srilanka Life.